Hi, Sally. I am back. We are going to go back to the PDF of the YTT manual, and we're going to anatomy. And that begins on page 118. So, we as yoga teachers always say that we are as old as our spines. Make a note of that after reading pages 121 and 122. We have 6 movements of the spines, and we want to weave those into our yoga warm-ups. So one very common one is your cat-cow. Of course, we're all familiar with that. The second one is your C shape, which could be something like just popping your hip out to one side, taking your body to the opposite side, and then of course we have the thread the needle when we go under, and we could bring that arm up, we could flow the flight on the way back. There's so much that we can do. I'm going to send you a video that's going to be about 7 minutes long. I believe it's on YouTube, that explains a little bit more about anatomy. So we have the important set of antagonistic sides, which are the hip flexors, the extenders. These all help control the tilt of the pelvis by rotating it. Right above the hip joints. I always tell my students to think of that pelvic floor as a bowl of water, right? That we don't want to spill. So this allows you to move gently into an interior tilt or a posterior tilt without spilling over, without going sloppy. So next we have the extenders, which this is often referred to as your sitting bones. You tell your students to remove that fleshy part of the bottom and just sink in. The glutes, and all this originates on the back of the pelvis and the sacrum. So remember that this all comes together, and you'll see when you read the book a little bit further. We're going to be moving into the flexors. The psoas, which originates on the lumbar vertebrae, and it goes all the way down. So think of the psoas as a pelvic girdle, from here all the way down to the middle of the thigh. So let's say you're teaching a low lunge or a high lunge or even a goddess pose. I always remind my students and bring awareness to them that we're working the psoas, so that they have a little bit more than you're doing this and this is what it's called. You want to let them know what they're working. Let's move it right to the hip flexors. These are the thighs, torso, close together, stitching it in. If we sit, let's say, for work for multiple hours, they're going to shrink, they're going to tighten, of course. So remind your students to stretch out after long hours of sitting to counteract this. Usually I tell my students, you're sitting on Zoom meetings or whatever, every hour you set a little alarm, sip a little water, do a couple of sun salutations, and just get a little movement going. So it's very easy to provide your students with this information. Also, let them know that every pose needs and deserves a counter pose. If you're going this way, you want to come this way. If you're going down, you're going to half lift, you're going to go down, and you're going to draw it all the way up. So if the spine is going this way, it's going this way. Think of cat-cow. Think of thread the needle. Every pose has a counter pose. And also the counter pose always needs to be easier than the actual asana. So thread the needle, you thread through, this extends, you're here, you release down, you flow your flight. That's very easy, that's your counter. You set it down and then you switch. So we're going into page 123 and 124, the anatomy of yoga and the skeletal system. Please read the pages prior to looking at this portion of the video. Again, page 123, 124 of your manual, if you printed it out, or if I happen to give it to you, or just the PDF. Also, I mentioned that I'm sending that 7-minute video that you should watch after reading page 124. Again, I believe it's on YouTube, but I'll send it. It simply lays everything out. It's so simple. So please know the classifications of the bones. Know that the skeletal is divided into two parts. We have the axial skeleton, and that's 80 bones. Not about 80 bones, it's 80 bones. And then we have the appendicular skeletal, which is 126 bones. The joints are classified into 3 different groups. The first one that we have is movable. Think of something that's firm, like the skull bone. It's fibrous, it's got fiber, feeling, right? So think of like an apple. Then we have the slightly movable joints, and that is the joints that are made out of cartilage. For example, the nose. The next one is a synovial, which is a freely movable joint. These are the ones that allow us to have the maximum capacity of movement. So let's say, think of your limbs, right? How we can extend, how we can hinge, how we can flex. Think of that. There are 2 different types of synovial joints. So the first one is hinging, movable joints, even here, the knee, front to back. And then the ball and socket joint, which an example is the hip, the shoulder, right? It's still synovial, but it moves, but it's different than it hinges. And then we move into the ellipsoidal joints. I always have a hard time with that word. And the example of that is the base of your, let's say, index finger. You could bend it to extend. You could rock it from side to side. However, you can't rotate it. Or you could rotate it if you're flexible, more than normal, a little bit more flexible, but still it's still limited. It's not going all the way around. You can't make a big O with it. It's kind of tight. And the next one I want to mention is the gliding joints. And this occurs between the surface of 2 flat bones that are held together by ligaments. So for example, some of these bones are in your wrist and in your ankles, right? They're movable, but they're held together by ligaments. The hinge joints next. These are movable joints. The knees, the elbows, and then we have those pivot joints. Example is your neck. When you turn side to side. And you want to be able to continue to be 80 and turn like that. You don't want to be so tight that when you turn, you have to turn your whole body, that you simply can't do this. So keep your yoga practice going so that you can be flexible, at least in that way. Saddle joints also, and these are only the thumbs because they rock back and forth. They rock side to side. However, their rotation is limited. The more you practice on the mat, the more you widen your fingers when you're in down dog, the easier all these movements get, of course. And then we're moving into the terms of movement in the skeletal. Again, please watch that video. I think it includes flexor, extension, abduction, adduction, etc. Really simple. Like I said, 7 minutes, and you'll know what everything is just by watching it. The muscular system is on page 125, 126, and 127. So when I teach, I always want to weave in a little bit of anatomy into my classes. Not a lot, you don't want to overwhelm them, but a little bit so that your students become aware of what muscles they're moving, how they're moving their skeleton in this practice. And you want to just make them aware. It's just better to know of what's happening. Instead of just saying down dog, you're giving them a little bit more information. The human body contains more than 650 muscles, which are attached to the skeleton. And it provides the power for us to move. It is made up of 3 different types of muscle: skeletal, the cardiac, and then the smooth muscle. Each has its own function for movement. There are 2 types of muscles in the human body: the involuntary muscles, and the other muscles are the voluntary muscles. So these muscles that we control ourselves are the voluntary muscles. However, the smooth muscles are involuntary muscles, the ones that we cannot control. Some example is your heart cardiac muscle, right? It just works on its own. So let's divide these into a group of 3s. Cardiac muscle, smooth, so remember that. Smooth muscle is often called involuntary muscle, since most of the internal organs are made of smooth muscle. Urinary bladder is one of them, arteries, veins, the digestive tract, etc. This is all smooth muscle. The next one is your skeletal muscle, and this makes up for about 40% of our adult body weight. The skeletal muscles are composed of long muscles and fiber. When we practice yoga, the muscles contract, and this contraction produces about 85% of heat in our bodies. In Sanskrit, we refer to this heat as tapas, meaning that we're creating heat in our body while we're on the mat moving. What does that do? We're so focused on our body that our minds get to break from chattering. So it's so important to just work on your body, put your mind aside, connect to your breath. Also, I want you to read pages 125, 126, and I believe 127, all PDF or book. Read it carefully. However, I'm going to move into the 3 types of contractions that we have. Isometric is the first one, which is a developing tension without muscle contraction. An example of this is when we're standing in mountain pose, right? We're active. The next one is the isotonic concentric, which is shortening a muscle. Think of going into your goddess pose, hinging at the knees, hinging at the elbows, everything shortens. Moving into isotonic eccentric, that is the lengthening of a muscle. In other words, think about your sun salutations. You're extending everything from the hip crease all the way to the fingertips, right? You're diving down, you're extending. The neck is suspended, the head is suspended. You're taking that flat half lift and then you're folding again. You're reversing it all the way up. You could feel those little ribs like a little accordion creating all that space and then joining together. We're moving into page 128 and 129, the anatomy of yoga and the cardiovascular system. We still have a little bit more to go. So sometimes we call the cardiovascular system the circulatory system because it consists of heart. It's muscles and its pumping device, and it's close to the vessels, right? The arteries, the veins, the capillaries. So blood contained in the circulatory system is pumped by the heart around a closed circle or a circuit of vessels. As it passes again and again through the various parts of the body of the heart, its circulation is in the body. So that's why we call that. The heart is a muscular pumping device. It provides the force that's necessary to circulate the blood to then all the tissues in the body, all the tissues. And this is the function that's vital for survival. 3 layers of tissues form the heart wall. The outer layer is known as the epicardium. The middle layer is known as the myocardium. And then we have the inner layer, which is the endocardium. So the 3 layers of the heart. The internal cavity of the heart is divided into 4 chambers: the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, the left ventricle. So I'm just touching a little bit of everything that you're going to find in your manual. And of course, you're going to get a little test, open book, and that's really going to help put all this together. So let's talk about blood. Blood is the fluid of life, right? That transports oxygen from the lungs to the body, to the tissues, carbon dioxide from the body tissues to the lungs. Blood is the fluid of growth, transporting nourishment from digestion and hormones throughout the entire body. Blood is the fluid of health, transports to fight diseases, substances that are in the way of the tissues, removes waste from the kidneys, etc. So arteries can oxygenate blood filled with nutrients away from the heart to all parts of the body. Yet arteries are thick walls, and they're like tubes that absorb the tremendous pressure wave of the heartbeat and slows the blood down. The pressure can be felt, of course, in the arms, in the wrist, in your pulse, everywhere. You could feel it, even on the above the foot, by the ankle. So eventually, these arteries divide into similar capillaries and even smaller blood vessels. We're going to move right into blood pressure. We use the blood flowing through the arteries because it has a higher pressure than the blood in the veins. So the blood pressure is measured, as we know, in 2 numbers. So please be aware that if a student suffers from either too high or too low blood pressure, that you're aware of it, not from it, aware of it. And know that it affects a yoga practice. So a student with high blood pressure is not going to be doing a headstand. Her down dogs are going to be maybe on the wall or very simple. She's not going to practice any forceful breathing like a Kapalabhati breath or a Bhastrika breath, nothing forceful. Also, when she comes out of a pose or out of a flow that's taking her forward, she's going to just take a slight tuck to the chin, slight, for a split second, just to balance her out a little bit. Same with a student with vertigo. So high blood pressure means, again, no force on the inhale or on the exhale. So you have a private student with high blood pressure, you want to do very simple breathing. Abdominal, Durga breath, Ujjayi is fine, but you don't want to do Ujjayi in a down dog because now she's suspended, it's more pressure. The anatomy of yoga and the digestive system. Again, that is in here, and that is page 130, 131, 132, and 133. So the digestive system, it's one of my favorite topics. It's made up of of course, digestive tract. And it is a series of hollow organs joined in a long and twisting tube from the mouth to the anus. Hollow organs are the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach. We move into the small intestines. That completes digestion. And then the large intestines, which is the colon, right? Followed by the rectum and the anus, and that's all for elimination. The solid organs are the liver, which produces your bile that is absorbed by the gallbladder, the pancreas, which produces the digestive juices that reach the intestines through the small tubes that are the little ducts. They're called the ducts. The gallbladder stores and delivers the digestive juices until they are needed in the intestines. So they basically kind of just store it. Part of the nervous and circulatory systems also play a major role in the digestive system. Digestion is so important, as we all know. When we eat food such as breads, meats, vegetables, etc., they form a nourishment, right, in the body. And this nourishment has to be broken down into smaller molecules. That's why it's so important to really meditate when you chew your food before you swallow. Take your time to eat. These nutrients, before they can be absorbed into the blood, they have to be carried into the cells. So please note that digestion begins at the mouth. It begins with saliva. Once you start chewing and that saliva is mixing with the food, that's digestion starting already. Once it's completed, that's when it starts to make its way down. Digestion requires oxygen to break down the food. Therefore, yoga should be done on a very empty stomach, maybe 2.5 to 3 hours before a practice. If you're teaching, you're really going to be eating, but then you'll have one nice meal in the evening. Twisting poses also are excellent for the liver, for digestion. I always tell my students to think of when they're twisting, they're in a bind, whether it's chair, humble warrior, whatever bind they're taking, think of just taking your makeup off, and it's got all different colors, your eyeshadow, your lipstick, your blush, and now you're running that under cold water, and you're wringing it, and you're clearing it. So every time we're wringing the body, we're doing the same thing. We're twisting, we're binding, we're clearing, we're cleansing. Same thing. Let's move into page 134, 135, and 136. The anatomy of yoga and the endocrine system. So there are 8 major glands that make up the human endocrine system. So this is the visible anatomy as opposed to the invisible anatomy, which is the chakras, which also correlate with the endocrine system. But there's 7. So let's go through them. The hypothalamus is a collection of specialized cells that is located in the front of the lower central part of the brain. It's a primary link to the nervous system, the endocrine system. This controls the pituitary gland by producing chemicals that either stimulate or suppress. The pituitary is the master gland, something you should know. Also, it is no bigger than the size of a little pea, a little split pea, and it is located at the base of the brain, just beneath the hypothalamus. It makes hormones that control several other endocrine glands. It relays information to the brain, such as environmental, temperature, light, exposure patterns, and feelings to the pituitary. The thyroid is located in front of the front part of your lower neck. It is shaped, we all know, it is shaped like a little butterfly. And it controls the rate at which cells burn the fuel from food to produce energy. So something to note when teaching is that practicing shoulder stands massages the thyroid. Something so simple as a shoulder stand massages your thyroid. Fish pose massages the thyroid. You're open, your eyes are rolling back, your body's going in a separate direction. This is so open and so lifted that it's actually getting a massage as you're breathing. The parathyroid attached to the thyroid are the little tiny glands that function together. These are the parathyroid. These regulate the calcium in the blood. And moving into your adrenal glands, the body has two triangular adrenal glands, one on top of each kidney. I mention that all the time. When somebody's in a happy baby pose, Ananda Balasana, tuck your belly in, roll side to side. You're massaging your lungs, you're massaging your kidneys, you're massaging your adrenal glands, which are so important. Cobra pose also massages the adrenal glands. So it's a back bend, but it's so active that the adrenal glands are pressing up. So it's nice to give your students this little bit. If you tuck your belly in, you're massaging your bladder. So there's so much to the body. The pineal body, or the pineal gland, this is located in the middle of the brain, and it secretes melatonin. This is a hormone that helps regulate our wake and our sleep cycles. And you know, so many people that do take melatonin to sleep. So reproductive glands, the gonads, are the main source of the sex hormones. In males, they're located at the scrotum. In females, they are inside the womb, the ovaries. We have the pancreas. The pancreas produces two important hormones. These work together to maintain a steady level of sugar in the blood and to keep the body supplied with fuel to produce and maintain that energy that we need stored for when we need to use that energy, right? We'll have that stop and go. So please know that the endocrine system regulates all of the hormones. It's all there. Let me see what else I want to mention. Yeah, we're going to move into page 137, the lymphatic system. We have two circulatory systems, your heart, your lungs. Remember, the heart and the lungs work together, and the blood vessels. Also, they're known as the cardiovascular system. And then we have the lymphatic system. Your body has more lymphatic fluid than blood. You know, we poke ourselves and we bleed, but we actually have more lymphatic fluid than we have blood. The lymphatic system is the circulatory system of our immune system. And you know that if you get sick, you have a sore throat, your lymph nodes can be a little swollen. So this filters out infections, organism, and ensures that harmful substances stay clear. The fluid called lymph is part of the lymphatic system, together with the lymphatic vessels, with the lymph nodes, with the thymus, with the spleen. This system is just crucial to support the entire immune system. All of this removes toxins from the body. So things to think about when teaching is perhaps mentioning to your students any times that the arms are overhead, they're interlacing their fingers, they're swaying side to side, they're twisting, they're cleansing the lymphatic system. Anytime they're doing any of this, because they're moving stagnant fluid. So think about emptying a vacuum canister. That's what we're doing with the body when we're moving it. Same exact thing. So it's always nice to give your students that little treat that not only are they doing this outside and they're in Warrior One, but they're also doing so much more, right? Moving into the anatomy of yoga and the nervous system. The nervous system is the major controlling, regulatory and communicating system of the body. It is the center of mental activity. It includes memory, learning, and all of your thought process. So the various activities of the nervous system are grouped together as three general, they overlap these functions. They are known as SIM, sensory, integrative, and motor. The nervous system is divided into two parts. The central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, right? And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And just note that when your students come in to take your class, whether it's in person or on Zoom, they all come in on sympathetic nervous system. They're all rushing, they're all letting go of their day to be here. And your first thing you want to do is take them from sympathetic to para. Just stop it. Just have them settle into themselves. And you can mention that to them while you're doing the breath, while you're doing meditation, right? You want your students to be running on parasympathetic, not sympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Oh my God, I gotta get through this red light so I can make it there on time. I gotta get into my yoga clothes so I can zoom in. That's all running in on sympathetic. But then breath and meditation and your Dharma chat and your slow little warm-up of just neck rolls or whatever immediately puts them into that rest and digest, that parasympathetic. So you want to do that first. Give them a safe space immediately and allow them to let go, and invite them as well to let go. This way they can connect the left and the right hemisphere of the brain to create that balanced central nervous system. One way of doing that in a hurry is that Nadi Shodhana pranayama, right? Connecting left to lunar and a solar sign. I think we're almost done, but I think we're going to finish up with the respiratory system. And I believe that's pages 140, 141, and 142 of your, whether it's your PDF or your manual. So supplying the blood with oxygen in order to deliver oxygen to each part of the body. And how does this happen? It happens when we breathe. When we inhale oxygen, and then we exhale carbon dioxide. So the exchange of gas in the respiratory system is the respiratory system's way of getting oxygen to the blood. Respiration is achieved via the mouth, the nose, the trachea, the lungs, the diaphragm. Oxygen enters the respiratory system through the nose or through the mouth, and the oxygen passes through the larynx, which is where the speech sounds are produced, and the trachea, which is that little tube that enters the chest cavity. Then the chest cavity is able to split into those two little smaller tubes that are called the bronchs. Each then divide into forming the bronchial tubes. So part of the respiratory system are the airways, the lungs and the blood vessels, the muscles, and the bones. All this is used while you're breathing. This is information that you can include again when teaching pranayama. You could include that the ribs or their bones support and protect the chest cavity, that they move to a certain degree, and that helps the lungs expand or contract. I always tell my students that we contract first, we inhale, we hold, we move on the exhale because that's when we expand, right? So things that you could just throw in there, and you don't have to know this all because it's impossible to know this all. But if you have your anatomy book, you're looking at your anatomy book, you're looking at this, and you're rereading, you're trying to put together your class constructions, how you're going to teach a class, and you want to sprinkle it with Sanskrit words. You want to sprinkle it with prana. You want to sprinkle it with anatomy. You want to give them more than just saying high lunge, warrior 1, warrior 2, peaceful, reverse triangle, extended triangle, pivot to goddess. We want to give them more than that. We want them to know that they're working internally, actually more than externally. So take a look-see at the video I'm going to send, or I've already sent. Read this over. When you think you've got it, you're going to take that test. I think it's in 2 parts when I give it. Open book. You can look. All the answers are in here in your PDF. If you're not finding it because your eyes are tired, you could Google it, because then the test is going to be something that's going to provide you just a look-see, quick information in the future, right? You're going to keep those tests, and that's going to help out a lot. Okay, let me go.